Exiled to the edge of known space, HFY intercepts a signal from a star that doesn't exist, a pulse too structured to be natural, too quiet to be understood. As she listens, the signal begins to rewrite the world around her, revealing fragments of a civilization that chose memory over survival. Drawn deeper into a reality shaped by remembrance, Inge discovers that the signal is not a message, but a living archive searching not for answers, but for someone to carry it. Time, identity, and history collapse as she becomes more than herself, a witness, a node in an ancient chain of presence that spans across galaxies. Because some civilizations don't want to be saved, they just want not to be forgotten. Stay with us to experience the end, or maybe the beginning, and don't forget to subscribe. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The signal came from a star that didn't exist. It wasn't listed in any observatory records. No spectral data. No history of formation, collapse, or drift. Just a patch of nothing between Perseus and Cassiopeia, cold and dark, without even background radiation to suggest it had ever held light. And yet, it called. Not in language. In structure. A pulse, perfectly spaced. Prime intervals. 13 frequencies converging into one. Not noise. Not code. Something older than syntax. The observatory didn't know what to make of it. They rerouted it to Central. Central passed it down. And eventually, it reached Unit 17, where no one should have been listening. But she was. Her name was HFY. Once a physicist. Now a technician. She'd been reassigned after the incident on Station Ilex. After the breach. After the silent corridor. After they pulled her out shaking, lips bleeding, eyes staring at something no one else saw. She didn't argue when they exiled her. She understood. 17 was silent. Outpost grade. No crew rotation. No visitors. Just atmosphere scrubbers, a decaying orbit, and a sky so quiet it hurt to look at. Until the pulse. She heard it first in her sleep. Not through comms, through her bones. A resonance that settled into her like dust. When she awoke, her skin was cold and her breath visible, even though the life support said 22 degrees Celsius. The sensors were fine. The diagnostics said nominal. But something had changed. She replayed the signal. Over and over. For hours. She shouldn't have. Because on the 12th loop, the silence responded. Not from the void. From inside the station. It wasn't a voice. Not in the way voices worked. The sound didn't come through speakers. It didn't echo off metal walls. It wasn't detectable by microphones or recordable by internal systems. It was a presence, vibrating through the station's frame, moving through Inge's spine, settling behind her eyes like an idea that hadn't yet become language. She sat still for a long time, listening to a sound that didn't exist. And the longer she listened, the more it started to shape itself into something like understanding. Not words. Geometry. Inverted structures. Impossible tessellations. As if thought itself had been folded into dimensions her brain didn't evolve to see, only feel. She activated the core scanner. Set it to passive. Waited. Nothing. No movement. No temperature flux. But the power draw spiked. Not on the logs. Not on the grid. In the wiring itself. As though something had bypassed the system and started feeding directly on the architecture. This station is listening back, something in her whispered. She didn't sleep that night. Not properly. But somewhere between awareness and dream, she saw it. The shape. Not clearly. But enough. A loop with no entry point. A circle, not drawn, but bent into existence. Around it, symbols. Rotating slowly. Not orbiting. Choosing direction. She awoke with a start. The air was warm again. The pressure normal. Her logs clean. And her body was shaking. Not with fear. With recognition. She'd seen this before. Not on 17. Not on Earth. Not even in the Ilex event itself. Before that. The early days. When she was still part of the deep wave analysis teams. When she and her mentor, Talvers, were decoding anomalous cosmic echoes from beyond the Centauri wall. There had been one file. Redacted. Deleted. Buried in a secure drive beneath layers of denial. But she remembered the phrase scrawled on the encrypted console, left there by someone who'd been reassigned a day later. It's not a message. It's a memory of being heard. Inge left the control room and walked the spine corridor in silence. The outer viewing deck hadn't been used in years. The shutter was half sealed, but she pried it open manually. Outside, nothing. The kind of nothing only the edge of the mapped sky could offer. But she felt it again. The pull. Like something enormous was behind that nothing, watching through it. Not with eyes. With remembrance. She placed her hand against the glass. And in that moment, her own memory shifted. Just slightly. But enough. A childhood recollection, her brother's voice, calling her back from the riverbank, now echoed with a different tone. A deeper resonance. As if the call had come not from her brother, but from beneath the world. She stepped back, heart racing. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't neural decay. The signal had done something. Not to her ears. Not even to her mind. To time. It's rewriting the past, she thought. No. Not rewriting. Reframing. It wasn't content to be found. It was finding her. She ran diagnostics again. Still nothing. So she did something dangerous. She rewired the outer dish to respond. She broadcasted a tone, her own voice, recorded once, years ago. A fragment from the ILEX recovery logs. Unknown presence detected. Memory contamination suspected. Requesting confirmation. She sent it into the dark. Then waited. 10 seconds. 30. 1 minute. Silence. Then, a return signal. Identical to hers. But not echoed. Older. With a layer of static she didn't recognize. Static that sounded familiar. Because it wasn't just interference. It was a recording of her voice calling out long before she ever arrived on this station. Her voice, but not her. Not the tone she remembered. Not the tempo. Not the fractured urgency of ILEX station. This recording was different. Calm. Slower. Measured. Almost expectant. It said, "You're not alone, Ench. You never were." She froze. There was no timestamp. No signal header. No traceable origin. The comm log simply wrote, "Received. Source unknown. Local time, 0.00 UTC. Repetition, infinity." The loop began to replay, again and again, as if the station couldn't decide whether it had just heard it or had always been hearing it. She stared at the waveform. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Hers. Temporal bleed, she realized. It's not broadcasting. It's echoing through me. Inch backed away from the console. The lights above her flickered, not from power failure, but in a pattern. Short, long, short. A pause. Again. Morse? She squinted. Let it run through. W. E. R. E. We remember. The phrase repeated in light. It wasn't just the signal anymore. The station itself had become part of the memory, absorbing, adapting, echoing her presence, her past, her decisions. A question pressed into her like weight. Was 17 ever empty? Or had it simply not awakened until now? She fled the control deck. Not in panic. In instinct. Down the auxiliary corridor, where no systems had worked in years. The lights were dead. The panels rusted. The floor uneven. But halfway down the hall, something new had appeared. A door. Unlabeled. Smooth. Not metal. Not part of the original station. It shimmered faintly, like a memory trying to manifest. Her breath fogged as she approached. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. A voice answered, her own. From the place where the signal ends. She reached for the handle. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It was the temperature of understanding, that strange heat that comes when a truth is so close, your body prepares to reshape itself around it. She opened the door. And the corridor was gone. Now she stood in a space that could not exist. The scale wrong. The geometry uncertain. It felt underground, though they were still in orbit. The walls were made of shifting glass and stone, filled with swirling data that looked like stars or thoughts. In the center, a chair. Familiar. ILEX station. Observation deck. The last place she saw before everything fell apart. And seated in it, someone else. Herself. But aged. Changed. Not older. Just further. This other Ange stood slowly. No fear. "I tried to stop you," she said, voice echoing through the room like sound folded through time. "I left the loop. I found where it begins. But I couldn't end it." Ange tried to speak, but the air around her slowed, thickened. Words stuck like frozen vapor. The other Ange reached out. And the archive bled. A flood of image, sound, and knowing. The breach wasn't an accident. The ILEX team had found this signal first. They buried it, tried to suppress it, fearing what it would do to time. But memory has gravity. And now, it was pulling everything inward. Inch collapsed. Her mind wasn't breaking. It was expanding, forced to hold contradictions. She was the first to hear the signal. She was the last to answer it. She was not the beginning. She was not the end. She was the listener. And that meant one thing. This place, this loop, this signal, it wasn't meant to trap her. It was waiting for her decision. To speak. To remember. To carry forward. She lay on the floor of the impossible room. Breathing. Barely. The other Ange, the version that had walked further, broken harder, remembered more, was gone. Or perhaps she had never been there at all. Perhaps she was only what the signal would make of her if left unanswered long enough. Inch sat up. The walls shimmered with fragments. Not holograms. Not recordings. Moments. Some hers. Some not. A child floating inside a gas giant's magnetic field, laughing. A hand reaching into dark water, pulling up a shard of sky. A woman, not Inch, whispering. This is how the universe keeps its promises. All of it held together by the pulse. The 13 frequencies. Still moving. Still folding inward. The archive, if that was what it was, had no boundary. It was not a machine. Not a language. It was structure through memory. And Ange was now tangled inside it. She stood. The moment she did, the room bent. Not physically. Chronologically. Time slowed. Or maybe she sped up. Her thoughts multiplied. One line of thinking stayed here, observing. Another drifted backward, toward the corridor. A third moved forward, past the door, towards something she couldn't yet define. All of her were her. All of them were true. She spoke aloud, not knowing which version would hear. "Why me?" The signal responded. Not in words, not in light, but through compression. Reality folded. The corridor reformed, but different. Each step she took now left a trail not behind her, but ahead. Echoes of her motion became instructions. Her decisions rewrote the space. Not metaphorically, physically. At the end of the new corridor, a chamber. Circular. Deep. A well. Inside it, darkness. Complete. Unmoving. She didn't hesitate. She descended. No ladder. No steps. Just a feeling of downwardness, like her body was falling through memory. The walls pulsed with symbols, not letters, shapes she almost recognized. She remembered Talvers, back on Ilex, muttering at night during the early signal studies. Some languages don't exist in time. They unfold through remembering. She'd laughed at him then. She wasn't laughing now. At the bottom, a platform. On it, nothing. Until she stepped onto it. And then, everything. A star exploded in silence. Not in space. In her mind. And saw. The origin of the signal, not a star, but a being collapsed into structure. A civilization so advanced, they could no longer die, only forget. Their last attempt to escape the loneliness of immortality was to encode their awareness into resonance. A pulse, buried in places where memory ran deepest, bone, time, guilt. Not a call for help. A call for witness. The signal had never sought answers. It had sought someone to hold it, to take the unbearable knowing of what they had been, what they had lost, what they had chosen, and carry it forward into a universe still young enough to care. Ange began to cry. Not from sorrow. From permission. For the first time, she understood. She didn't have to solve anything. She didn't have to save them. She only had to remember. And be changed. The platform rose. She rose with it. Back to the corridor. Back to 17. Back to herself. The door was gone. But the signal remained. Now quiet. Settled. Inside her. Ange returned to the comms deck. The stars were still there. Silent. Cold. She opened the transmitter. Not to ask. Not to reply. To speak. She leaned close to the mic, closed her eyes. And said, I remember you. The signal flared once. And for a moment, just a moment, the sky seemed to listen. The moment she spoke, the station changed. Not visibly. Not loudly. But fundamentally. As though the memory she carried had begun to rearrange the world to accommodate it. Or to survive it. The temperature dropped. Then spiked. Then stabilized in a range that didn't match any environmental setting. The oxygen sensors flickered with values that didn't exist. The comms panel stopped accepting input, but not because it failed. Because it no longer needed her to speak. She had done what it asked. Now the station would respond. A soft hum began, deep in the metal, below the wiring, somewhere beneath what even the engineers had known how to build. It wasn't feedback. It wasn't error. It was alignment. 17 had heard the signal before. Maybe always. Maybe it was part of the signal grown around it, by it, like coral forming around an ancient shipwreck. And stared at the stars outside the viewport. But they were no longer where they had been. Some had moved. Some were missing. And some impossibly had multiplied, appearing twice, blinking out of sync like a stutter in space-time. She turned back to the terminal and saw the message. Observation log updated. Entry hashtag 00000A. Witness confirmed. Memory chain intact. Transmission route enabled. A new line appeared beneath. Begin relay? Y/N. Her fingers hovered over the input. Relay to what? To whom? But even as the question formed, she felt the answer. The signal wasn't finished. It had nested inside her. It had altered the station. It had shown her what it had once been. But now, it wanted to continue. It wanted to grow. Not as a virus. Not as a conquest. As remembrance. Memory as living structure, a network of presence that stretched across light years, carried not in machines, but in witnesses. Carried by those willing to be changed. She typed Y. And the stars shifted. A ripple passed through the sky, not visible, not loud, but final. Like the universe blinking for the first time in ages. Coordinates appeared on the console. Not familiar. Not mapped. But waiting. A route. No propulsion activated. No jump signal. No burn trajectory. But the station moved. The artificial gravity tilted just enough to feel it in her teeth. Outside the viewport, the stars realigned again, less like motion and more like the laws of perspective rewriting themselves to accommodate a new center. Her center. She stumbled, caught herself on the console. The hum deepened. Lights pulsed along the floor. She was being taken. And still, no fear. Because fear was for the uninvited. And she had been called. She passed through the station, corridor to corridor, watching as the old, neglected frame reshaped itself. Bulkheads peeled open. Unused modules lit up for the first time. A botanical pod, long since dead, now bloomed with light, not leaves. A section of wall in the forward cabin opened without prompting. Inside, a chair. Simple. Angular. Not made for comfort, but made for alignment. She sat. The hum reached its peak. And the voice returned. Her voice. We are not made to last. But we are made to carry. Memory is not survival. It is the refusal to vanish. A soft light enveloped the station. And then silence. True silence. The kind that doesn't mean nothing is happening. The kind that means everything is beginning. There was no arrival. Not in the way humans measure such things. No flashing lights. No landing sequence. No announcement from navigation. Only a slow unfolding, like the universe exhaled. The stars outside the viewport had gone wrong. Some hung too close. Others spun backward. One drifted like a flame inside a sealed jar, as if being observed changed its shape. But Inge no longer felt afraid of what she didn't understand. She had become part of it. The chair released her with a soft click. She stood, her steps slower now, heavier, not with fatigue, but with presence. The station's corridors responded to her movement. Lights bloomed ahead of her. Doors opened just before she reached them. The signal wasn't guiding her. It was walking with her. She reached the observatory, a dome that hadn't opened in years. The shielding slid away silently, revealing a sky unlike any charted. And there, above, a structure. No, not a structure. A being. It looked like architecture until it moved. Until it breathed. A vast spiral, not made of metal or matter, but of motion remembered. Like the residue of thousands of lives, spun into shape by gravity, loss, and the refusal to disappear. It did not speak. It did not demand. It only existed. And she understood. This was the origin. The first to fall. The first to choose remembrance over silence. The first to encode its grief into vibration and launch it into a cosmos too young to listen. And fell to her knees. Not in worship. In acknowledgement. This was what the signal had always been. Not a warning. Not a cry. A gift. A carrier wave of memory, seeking minds soft enough to shape and be reshaped. And now, she was the signal too. The spiral reached downward. A thin filament, a thread of light, extended towards 17. Not to consume. To connect. And stood, one last time. Walked to the edge of the viewport. And placed her hand against the glass. The thread met her palm. It passed through. And in that moment, she felt. The thoughts of a race older than stars. The silence of their final day. The choice to embed themselves in pattern, in pulse, and those who would come later. The promise, we were here. And the plea, please remember that we were kind. Then, calm. The thread withdrew. The stars returned. The station unchanged. But now part of something larger. A node. A voice. And returned to the control room. The relay interface still pulsed, but not for her anymore. The memory had moved on. She sat and began to write. Not a report. Not a log. A letter. To no one. To everyone. To whoever might come next. She wrote. I was not the first. I will not be the last. But I listened. And now, I remember. That is enough. She signed it with her name, not because it mattered, but because names are how we return to ourselves. And then she closed her eyes. And listened. Not to the signal. To the quiet after.